Can I share what the AI said about me?
Yeah.
So, first screen, I sat down and it said I was a woman, 31, Asian, sad face.
Sad face?
All of which is
I disagree,
correct.
man.
I'm Ben Davis, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from Artnet News. It's the end of June, it's very hot outside, and it's time to take a look back at the hot art stories of the last month. Today, the Art Angle team has picked out 3 items to talk about on the agenda. The announcement of a brand new, ambitious, museum-like art venue, Canyon, dedicated to immersive video art on the Lower East Side, New York. And we'll also talk about the general state of immersive art. We'll talk about what went down at Art Basel, the big Swiss art fair that is the art industry's most important event, and the ongoing chaos in art prices. And finally, we'll talk about the Oscar-winning actor Adrien Brody's painting show in New York City, which has everyone talking, or at least tittering. I am joined here in New York by Artnet culture editor Min Chen, sitting right next to me.
So glad to be here.
And live from Berlin, senior editor and Art Angle co-host Kate Brown, who is just back from Basel. Am I right about that, Kate?
You are. Yes, I'm back from Basel, slightly recovered.
Well, to get us going, did you see anything art-wise that's memorable in Switzerland?
Yeah, definitely. I was only there for a couple of days, so it was a whirlwind. But beyond the fair, I did go to Jordan Wolfson's VR experience, Little Room, which I'm sure you guys heard about.
I did, which sounds far out. I mean, did you get scanned? I mean, tell people about this work.
Yeah, I did get scanned. The first mistake I made, which was to not go with a buddy. You kind of scan together, but then I thought that was a mistake. And then in the end, maybe it wasn't, because after you go through this scan, which is, involves 98 cameras, it's kind of like more complicated than getting through security at the airport or donating blood. Like, it's a real process. You spend quite a bit of time with this person, and then you actually like switch bodies in the VR.
Yeah, I think you still need to. This is a artwork that, yeah, like you said, the artwork is not a sculpture, not a painting, not a film. It is a VR work that involves you swapping bodies through a 3D scan.
Yeah, you get a 3D scan and then you put on the headset. We've all done a VR by now, except that when you enter into this VR space, you are not yourself anymore. You are somebody else. And while you would think that the weirdest thing about that is being somebody else, actually what the strangest thing is to see yourself embodied by somebody else. And Jordan Wolfson does like a super minimal approach inside the VR environment. It is literally just you and this other person. Well, it's you as this other person. And then there's a mirror in front of you both. And it's really eerie because even your retina is scanned. So when the person is looking around, you're watching yourself looking around. And the strangest effect of it is that the other person is staring at themselves, which is you. So you're kind of just both staring at each other. It's horrifying. Honestly, it's very Jordan Wolfson. It's totally horrifying. I'm writing a review of it, which will say as much.
Yeah, I was talking to Andrew Russeth, who also went to Switzerland and also was scanned. And he was saying that, yeah, down to the tattoos on the other person's hands, which is far out. The point is to be horrifying, right? Or it's supposed to be some kind of experience of madness, right?
Yeah. I think like the idea of like the first person perspective that you get from VR is something very fundamental to the technology. But then this idea of like switching that, so you have the first person perspective on yourself, it just creates this strange psychological rupture that I think is really cool. Like, it's a very novel work, and it's actually quite like austere. There isn't like a ton going on in it, in spite of like how advanced the tech is. But yeah, the whole process, I mean, you got to line up, they have stickers that say Jordan Wolfson Friends and Family for like art industry people, but they're all still queued up, like taking all their jewelry off. And I think that the work really begins with the bureaucracy involved in these like clunky technologies.
Wow.
So yeah, it was cool.
How long is it going to take to participate in a 3D scan virtual reality body swapping work?
So I think a lot of people who were in Basel for business went on Monday. Andrew Russeth was one of them, and he said that he queued up for a long time. But I actually on Tuesday, which is the VIP day of the fair, I went around the fair and then I snuck away to the Fondation. There was really no one there. I was in line with curator Nicolas Tremblay and a couple collectors and one of their advisors who ended up body swapping with me. So there was no one really there. But I think on the usual day, depending on the queue, it can be anywhere from at the fastest 45 minutes up to 3.5 hours because, there's a lot of steps involved. It's very involved.
This kind of reminds me of that film 10 years ago called The Congress. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's Robin Wright playing this actress. It's a little bit meta, but she's playing her last role where she is going to be scanned, again, full body scan into the cloud, and she's going to live on as an avatar. And I don't really remember much about it, but consequences ensue. I think it's incredibly prescient.
Is it a horror movie or a comedy?
I'm going to say it's a horror movie.
Yeah, well, sounds that sounds like a potential Wolfson inspiration then.
For sure. What have you guys been up to?
Yeah, what about you, Min? You swapped bodies with anybody here in New York?
Well, I would say I also experienced something similar, but not so extreme. It's also neither a painting, a sculpture, or a film, but I was at Tribeca Immersive, which is Tribeca Film Festival's immersive program. And this year they've got a group exhibition with nearly a dozen works that use, creative technologies from AR to VR. One work I wanted to highlight is called AI and Me, The Confessional and AI Ego. So it's created by this artist couple, the Motts, and they've basically created this AI that judges people based on their appearance. So you sit down,
Cool.
They've got a booth there. You sit down in a booth and you face this camera, which is on top of an old school monitor, which displays the AI output. I spoke to one of the Motts, Octavian Mott, at the opening, and he told me, this is their way of exploring a different aspect to the relationship between humans and AI. It's really allowing people to see themselves reflected in AI and the data that AI is fed on. And I found it really engaging, and I was waiting to get my...
Did it rate you?
I was waiting to get my feelings hurt, and Octavian is like, don't worry, you'll be fine. But it's actually really engaging. Can I share what the AI said about me?
Yeah.
So first screen, I sat down and it said I was a woman, 31, Asian, sad face.
Sad face?
All of which is
I
correct.
disagree, man.
It got everything correct apart from my age. And then it got it even more wrong in the second screen when it called me a late 20s specimen that exudes botanical boredom and tuition level seriousness.
Tuition level?
Seriousness, yes. This AI is very good at giving a backhanded compliment. So
Yeah, so this is a poetic thing. I was going to, since you brought up pop culture references, I was going to say this sounds like a Black Mirror episode.
it does
is what
sound
this
like
sounds
a
like.
And I mean, it's happening right now. There's this trend now of people asking ChatGPT for tips on how they can get a makeover.
Oh man, yeah, there was something I found through Twitter in the office that I was sharing with people. This, not an artwork, just a tech guy did a project called Looks Mapping, where he scraped all the Yelp review data from New York and then rated the attractiveness of all the reviewers, and then created a map of restaurants in New York where you could see, how hot the restaurant was. There were artists who did stuff 10 years ago. The artist Paolo Cirio did a similar piece where he scraped Facebook data, but that was like a cautionary tale. It was supposed to warn you about how much data there was out there. And this guy is just I'm doing the same thing. It was kind of a trivial thing that I did with this technology. And I think it's good. We all know we think like this. Take a look at how your favorite restaurant rates.
It's funny. It reminds me of that, Mark Zuckerberg's first project.
Very good
pre-Facebook.
point.
So.
Yes.
The ultimate reference, yeah.
But there's a strange connection between the project you described, Min, and Jordan Wolfson's project. Though using different technologies, just messing with your psychology in a very deep way, a sort of emergent trend maybe right
I think
now.
also the deep ambiguous way. They're both very ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it really plays on human vanity in a way and how we see ourselves. So 100%, I see that.
Yeah.
What about you, Ben?
Oh, well, hey, time for something completely different. I went to Chicago recently, and I got to go to the Art Institute of Chicago and see their blockbuster show, Frida Kahlo's Month in Paris, A Friendship with Mary Reynolds. It closes at the beginning of July, so there's still time to see it. And yeah, haven't had time to write about it, but wanted to bring it up because I think it's a funny show. It's not a bad show. It's good, but it is amusing to me that we're doing individual lives in the month of Frida Kahlo here. It's like that one time Frida Kahlo went to Paris. I mean, how much deeper can Frida Mania go, really?
Wow. Did you have any interesting takeaways from it? Like, what did happen in Paris over that 4-week period?
Well, so the thing is, I'm not sure much happened. I mean, it's the Art Institute of Chicago has a deep holding of works by Mary Reynolds, who was the partner of Marcel Duchamp, and she was an experimental bookbinder. So she has these works that are, essentially like really cool book covers. Couldn't be more different than Frida Kahlo in a way, because Frida Kahlo is so central to her own work. That's part of why it resonates, because the idea of self-portraiture is very important. And Mary Reynolds is someone who made the cover of other people's works, and they don't have her image in them at all. I don't know. My friend, our ex-colleague, Rachel Corbett, was telling me that she was talking to her publisher about what sells in the book world. And her publisher was like, basically anything about the enduring power of female friendship. Can you pitch that? And so I really look at this show, which is, the subtitle is A Friendship with Mary Reynolds. And I can't help but think of that because it really seems, although it is an interesting show, and no shade to the curators in a way, because it really seemed like there was a crowd for it and it's well curated and all that stuff. But it really seemed to me like, I'm not sure there's a lot of proof that these two women were that key to each other's creative journeys at all. Like, they maybe wrote 1 or 2 letters where they mentioned each other, not even to each other, where they just said, yeah, Frida's really cool. And, Mary's awesome. And other than that, it's just kind of like they happened to share a house for a month in Paris.
That's so interesting. I mean, there's such a deep and very valid desire to like fill in these gaps of 20th century art history, and also, earlier than that. But it does get kind of like industrialized at this point where I feel like some of the connections are becoming a bit tenuous. I mean, the intention is good, no? Like, there's clearly like a desire for this.
Yeah, I agree. And also, my impression of Frida Kahlo's time in Paris was that she was very annoyed and very irritated by everyone. So it's nice to hear that she made a friend.
Well, we should move on to our main topics. And in a way, let's hop back to the digital space, although it is also very much about figuring out what works with an audience right now. So, Min, this was a big story on the site this last week about this new proposed venue supposedly opening next year, Canyon. So explain what that's all about.
Sure. So New York is going to get a new museum. It's called Canyon, although it's really billing itself as a cultural venue for time-based and durational art. So they're thinking performance art, video art, new media, sound art, and so on. So it's opening on the Lower East Side, and it will be purpose-built, especially to showcase this kind of art. So there's going to be a performance hall, galleries equipped with like state-of-the-art technology, and an atrium with cafes, bars, and the like. Its founder is Robert Rosencrantz, who is a philanthropist and a collector, and the cultural venue is going to be headed up by Joe Thompson, who was the founding director of Mass MoCA. So their feeling is that contemporary audiences are increasingly and still seeking out experiential and immersive content. But Thompson told me that many of these same people are not feeling at home in galleries, museums, and performing arts venues, which is something that Canyon is aiming to address. So it's tentatively planned 2 shows for its opening in 2026. One of them is a Ryoji Ikeda exhibition, and another one is the latest iteration of World Building, which is Hans-Ulrich Obritz's long-running show about art and video games. So what do we think of such a model for a museum?
There's a museum similar, or an institution similar to that in Berlin called Light Art Space, which works at the intersection of art and tech. It's a private institution, but it fills a gap that is sorely missing in Berlin. I'm curious, like, how do you think this fits into the institutional landscape in New York?
I will note that, Canyon, of course, is coming up in the space that's pretty crowded, but also thriving. We have our tech houses, we have the Super Blues, we have Team Labs, but also, there've been a number of museums that are exploring, digital art. So there's Mercer Labs in New York. Kansas just got its Museum of Light and Art, and also Rafik Anadol is opening his AI art museum in Los Angeles.
I mean, I gotta admit, Min, I was ready to be really irritated when I read your story because there's a lot of really low-brow versions of this immersive stuff. I mean, I lived through the immersive Van Gogh wave of a few years ago and survived. And it just seems like that kind of thing was everywhere. And there was like, I think it's fair to say, a bubble in it. And this institution kind of won me over just in the pitch in reading it, or I was surprisingly engaged by it in the sense that, yeah, they're opening with, I think Ryoji Ikeda is a tremendous artist. I've reviewed his works before at the Park Avenue Armory. I thought it was really spectacular, but also really thoughtful. And I'm really interested in this show about video games and art. I think video games are underexplored in the art world. So it's trying to do something serious. It is interesting because I think the immersive art scene is undergoing an evolution, right? I think that this moment when you could just throw up images of a popular artist like Frida Kahlo or Claude Monet and animate it and with some music and then rake in the cash is definitely over. Like, I was just getting to the point where I'd been to so many of those, my eyes were glazing over. Like, I can't be stuck in this loop forever, right? So this attempt to try and do something different, but I mean, I do have a lot of questions about it. The institution that you said it filled a niche, Kate. What niche do you think that is? Because this is very much pitched around video art and immersive art.
And it sounds quite similar to what Light Art Space is doing in Berlin. And I think, there is a specific kind of expertise needed for time-based art that deserves its own kind of institution and administration, right? Like, there's questions about how to conserve the works, how to present them, all this kind of the canons behind them. So it makes sense to me that there would be an institution kind of working at this intersection. But I think there's a real diverse audience that comes to these kinds of events. As Min said, I think they're maybe feeling alienated in traditional museums. And as we've talked about in different ways on this podcast, like, I don't think that museums have necessarily figured out how to solve that yet. So it makes sense that new institutions would crop up. LAS is one of those.
Some of the things that convinced me about this, just in some of the initial writing about it, was, little things that they mentioned, like, okay, so the galleries will have like a time bar that tells you if it's a looping work, like how far you are close to the beginning or end of the film. Like, great idea. That is a perennial problem with video art, is that you're walking into these looping experiences that are meant to be experienced beginning to end. The hours, I think I read, they're proposing that they be 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., which great idea. It's kind of weird that museums are open during the working day. And then that the galleries will be more kind of like living rooms. You've seen that a lot in museums when they do like a Pipilotti wrist or an immersive environment where they're beanbag chairs and they're really meant to be lounged inside. Fine idea. I think those are all good ideas. I do have this question about this because, well, a couple questions. One is about this is the royal road to young people. And I'm just not totally sold on that. So I wonder what you think about that. Yeah, let's just start there.
I don't know. I keep hearing that people are still into immersive experiences, and I don't doubt that. And I agree that maybe we ourselves are experiencing some form of immersive fatigue. But I think if the numbers are there, if audiences find them compelling, I agree with Kate that such an offering does make the museum space or the cultural space a bit more accessible, more welcoming to a wide array of audiences, especially if, something like immersive Van Gogh, we might side-eye it and, think it's a bit lowbrow, but there are people who, don't have the opportunity to see a real Van Gogh. So this is their opportunity. And I will say I've occasionally been moved by an immersive experience. And yeah, so.
For me, it's like, I think this particular project that you wrote about is so different from, Rafik Anadol's Data Land, which I feel more skeptical about, or this other one in Kansas, the Kansas Museum of Art and Light. which, you know, when you look at those two programs, I feel like there's more of a chance there of this being sort of this wide, relevant, edging towards blockbuster selfie moment museum making, which, you know, it has its value. Whereas I feel like the Canyon Museum sounds like it's a bit more of a considered program. And I don't know if this makes sense. I'm going to try it out here, but like I was thinking about the idea of like an AI museum to go to Refweek's Dataland. It's similar to like a photography museum or something. And I was thinking about how museums are like these tools to which we can frame the world. And they're in that sense like very political projects. And so I feel like you really have to be skeptical of some of these museums programs, that they're not just serving up the future as this entirely friendly, colorful, as Ben said, you know, like highly intelligent lava lamp. And so I think the challenge of these new projects, and you know, it's on us as journalists to really like look at what they're doing and see if that there's enough like criticism of their media baked into their program, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know the meme that's like, you have two wolves inside of you? I feel like this Canyon venue has two wolves inside of it. Like on the one hand, it's trying to be very state of the art, and this idea that it's like, it's the museum experience completely reconsidered to be high tech, be there for custom immersive art experiences. But then on the other hand, it's like some part of it seems to me, it's kind of like there's a tension to be kind of like cheap and flexible. You know, I think a good immersive experience does have to have bespoke tech like for it. Otherwise, you're just repeating the same kinds of projection format with animation, which is, I think, what basically began to happen with those immersive X, name the name brand artist kind of things, is that it's just, there was a format that's just always basically the same thing. And so on the one hand, you're trying to really invest in the medium, but on the other hand, I just think that in order to maintain the novelty of these things, you're going to have to update the tech, which is going to be expensive. And then I'm a little bit suspicious when they say that they're not going to have a permanent curatorial team, which I read in some of the coverage, that they're going to depend on rotating shows. Because that does sound to me, it's like, okay, we're trying to do something with this unused office space. We're going to reframe this as a immersive institution that's, you know, has some great people working with it. Ian Chang, who's a great artist, came up with the name Canyon because it's a canyon-like office space. But yeah, I just really see two things pulling in different directions. On the one hand, towards like these really elaborate, high-tech things, immersive things. And on the other hand, there's a lot of talk in museum world about how objects are very expensive to store, and that video art is potentially much more a flexible medium, but that's a totally other desire and demand being put on these things, that they're like flexible, easily programmable spaces.
I don't think so. Like digital art is notoriously hard for traditional museums to stage. Kate mentioned whether it's because of the cost or the technical expertise, which makes me think about, with so many of these museums popping up, what does it mean for like the traditional institutions?
Yeah,
especially if they don't have a studio drift installation, if they don't have an infinity room, how are they appealing to an audience looking for experiential art?
Well, yeah, you know what this reminds me of more than anything else is The Shed. This institution in New York that was Mayor Bloomberg's pet project, and it launched, I don't know how many years ago now, with all the same rhetoric. They were just like, it's going to be this new kind of space that's flexible because like new genres need flexible stuff. And I feel like, yeah, there's still stuff going on in The Shed, but that hype really died down. The novelty of it died down fast. So I do wonder how much the novelty of this kind of thing wears off. Whereas the thing about museums, which do have a lot of problems with showing new art, but they're also, the strategies for showing old art are established. So it's like a little less like you have to rethink everything over and over again with each installation. I don't know. Perhaps we should move on to the next section, which, Kate, you talked a little bit about Jordan Wolfson, which is right on the money for what this conversation about new forms of technologically different art. But there was a lot of other stuff going on in Basel, and, we've got our eyes on what's going on in the industry. So what did you learn?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I wonder if Jordan Wilson would ever appear at one of these museums, and I think not. But that aside, yes, I was just in Basel last week for the 2025 edition of the fair, which, has about under 300 galleries, 289 international galleries, and the usual crush of collectors, curators descending on this like tiny Swiss city for like 3 to 4 days. Yeah, and it was interesting to see the event this year. A lot is changing. We've been reporting a lot on the sort of cloud of caution, this uncertainty in the art market. And this was definitely like underpinning at the fair, and you could see it in the strategies and how people presented things in their booths, and also, where the focus was in terms of buyer interest. Everything was really a lot more cautious, a lot more considered. There was also, a shift in terms of who was coming, which I think was really interesting. Like the buzz around the fair floor was that there was like a lot less Americans this year than usual, that maybe they're waiting to go to Paris. So the kind of high level takeaway is that the fair is really changing. It's not for the worse necessarily. I do think that the world at large is getting worse, and that's the art world is not immune from that clearly, and neither is the art market. But I definitely saw a fair and an industry that was like finally sort of ready to accept the need to be agile and adapt quickly, and just like the sort of no more shock anymore, I guess.
Did it feel like things had changed in terms of the business being done? I mean, in the lead up to the fair, Naomi Ray had a big long piece called "The Art Market Has Lost Its Grip on Pricing, Now What?" which was talking about some of the things you just were talking about how prices got so out of control that we're reckoning with that now.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems like the area of the market that's really in trouble is this 80 to 800K zone. We call it like the middle market, so to speak. And I think that you could see evidence of that at the fair in terms of also a new section, which is called Premiere. So this was a new sector of the fair this year that presents contemporary art made in the last 5 years, and up to 3 artists could show in these booths. And I mean, my read of it was just like, the emerging arts sector is the one that's sort of doing well right now, or at least it's doing better than some of the other ones, because if people are hesitant to buy, it's a lot easier to convince someone to buy something that's slightly cheaper. So that was like a new part of the fair that was built out as well. But, Basel's still Basel. Like there was beautiful works of art that, were in the 10 to 20 million range, and at, Pace and Hauser and this kind of thing. But it's just not as frothy as it used to be. And everyone's kind of accepted that as the new way.
I have a question about specific art that was shown at Basel. Felix Gonzalez Torres' performance art piece. I've not been to a lot of art fairs, but I can imagine performance art is rare to see at an art fair. Did you notice any reactions to it? What even is the market for performance art, actually?
Yeah, so it's a 1991 work. It's untitled, but it's called Go-Go Dancing Platform. And so it's this little baby blue platform with light bulbs around the side of it. And for 5 minutes a day, I believe, a performer will come, and you don't know when they will come if you own this piece, and will perform this dance. And crucially, the performer or the dancer has their own music in, which you can't hear. So it's a private public moment. And it's one of his most famous pieces. He made it after his partner died of an HIV-related illness and after the loss of his father. So it was presented at Hauser and Wirth. I don't know why it was being sold at this particular moment. It's been in the same collection for decades. So that's interesting in and of itself, but it was on sale with quite a hefty price tag of 16 million. And you're right, Min, you don't typically see performance art at fairs. It's hard to sell, although I guess this one is an undeniably important work of institutional value. I mean, I'm sure if you owned it, you would barely see it because it would just be constantly on view in museums. Hauser and Wirth was very quick to point out to me that it's not an edition, it's a unique piece, because everyone's seen it somewhere. So people think that there's iterations of it, but there is actually only one. I don't think it's sold. I didn't see in any of the reports that it did sell. It is a harder place.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that Ian Chang mentioned in the coverage of Canyon was that the market for experimental work has dried up. That was one of the pitches for this new museum, which presumably will commission video and technology-based art. And he said because the art market has become so fixated on paintings, was that the vibe?
Basel's such a high quality fair that it never really feels that way in the way that I think it feels at like other fairs that I might not name. People bring really good quality work, but yeah, it is generally a little bit less experimental. But it is experimental, and there's still so much energy around, which I think is showing like a real vibe shift in taste, is Art Basel Social Club, which is I think in its 4th edition now. And this was in an old like 18th century bank. And of course, like Swiss banks are quite a loaded thing in this world. And so it was in this old building. I think there was more than 500 artists on view. Someone was like, this is bigger than the Venice Biennial, which felt like a bit of a stretch in terms of like curatorial weight. But like, nevertheless, it was really fun. It was ambitious. There was tons of things going on. There was like a sauna, a nail art studio, a hair salon, a Picasso as well. Back to our point about experiences, like people, whether it's immersive or not, like people really want to go and experience something. We live on screens all the time. People want to bump up against each other and have a sort of a serendipitous experience. And I think that Art Basel Social Club does a really good job of that. So there's a lot of energy around that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was actually at a data art conference at Harvard last week, and two different people presented data saying that the age of successful artists at the market had gone up over time. The successful artists were getting older. And I think that that's underlying the story about Canyon, underlying some of this stuff about the social vibe people are trying to bring into the art fairs. Underlying that is this idea of like, how do you hook in kind of like some new kinds of energy, right?
Yeah.
Anything else left to say about Basel, Kate? Any major points that we've missed?
My big takeaway was that Basel is getting more regional. It's with a lot more Europeans, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that there's still a really strong buying focus there. You have people's attention in Basel in a way that you don't necessarily have in a city like Paris, or when people are doing kind of like destination art fair traveling to places like Seoul. So I think that Basel will remain, but it's definitely recalibrating itself. It's like the chips are all in the air right now, and they haven't landed, and we don't exactly know where they're going to land.
Well, let's talk about, finally then, another kind of new energy, I guess, entering the art market. I don't know if this counts as youthful new energy, but Min, you and I both saw the Adrien Brody's painting show here in New York, Made in America. We're talking about it because it is legitimately an art story that people are talking about outside of the art world, for the obvious reason that Academy Award-winning actor Adrien Brody is a name people know. Just missed each other at the gallery last Friday, so you got to experience it in solitude, as it should be experienced.
Did you experience it in solitude?
Yeah, I was pretty in my head trying to figure out what it all meant. Maybe describe the show. What did you make
solitude.
of it?
So it's, oh my gosh, it really is.
I think that reaction it says a lot.
For me, like, it's really just a showcase of celebrity, of what you can get away with when you're famous. I mean, there's a level of like low-key like entitlement that no matter what you make as a celebrity, it's going to be interesting, it's going to be valuable. And I believe one of his paintings sold for quite a big sum. I'm not sure.
Yeah, $400 and some $1,000 at a charity in France. So not a trivial amount of money for this emerging artist, Adrien Brody.
Maybe to sort of paint the pictures, you could describe the work, and that work in particular. I mean, that was the one with Marilyn Monroe on it, right?
It is a show of collage style, I would say, street art paintings. If you heard our episode on red chip art with Annie Armstrong from a few months back, it's that. It's big street art themed, celebrity focused, pop art inspired artworks. They're large canvases that mainly feature images of Marilyn Monroe and Looney Tunes cartoons. Although the Hamburglar and there's a Simpsons character thrown in there, Betty Boop is in there. I mean, pop art references that I have to say are pretty dated. They're collage style, so they're like little bits of old-timey ads that are kind of like comment on what's going on. Most notably to me, the entire thing, and this goes to Min's point about celebrity, is studded with quotes by Brody himself about the meaning of his work. So there'll be like an enormous quote on the wall that says, "Made in America is a reflection of the culture that raised me and a reckoning with what it left behind." Or another one says, "What we consume consumes us." And It's like very ego-driven thing, and he has just been mercilessly mocked for it. I mean, I have to say, it gave me a lot of joy, the show. I mean, genuinely, but sort of a way that seeing a movie like Cats or Madam Web or a real so bad it's good kind of film does.
Which was the best piece for you?
Oh, well, Min. So Brody's mom is a photographer of some note. And there is an artwork that the ego involved with it is kind of hard to fathom, in that it is an enormous black and white photo of Jean-Michel Basquiat that is taken by his own mom, Adrien Brody's mom, and he's posed in his studio with like his own very signature Jean-Michel Basquiat graffiti on the walls behind him. But then Adrien Brody has added his own touches to it, which include a shark coming out of his pants. And then on the wall, in words that look like Basquiat's graffiti, he's added his own name, Brody, 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 over and over again. But the letters subtract, so it ends up saying OD as an overdose. And then at the bottom right corner, there's a small vial of heroin in the corner. So he's sort of inserting his own persona into this painting about Jean-Michel Basquiat, and his somehow commenting on his actual death by heroin overdose and somehow connecting himself to it. It's so thoughtless in a way that it's unbelievable.
Like a few years ago, he would have been in way more
Completely
trouble for this than he is. It seems to be right now. Like, people are just eye rolling. But this is just such an American moment to me. Like, you've got a Hollywood star with a show in New York that sucks, and everybody loves to say that it sucks. Like, it's got Scrooge McDuck in it, probably, or whatever. He's been an artist for a while. He was saying that he was actually an artist before he became an actor. And then I was looking, and he also was at Art Basel Miami Beach in 2015 with some paintings that were also sort of about burgers and violence or whatever. So this isn't his first go at the merry-go-round.
Yeah, it's really like anti-consumerism for dummies kind of stuff. You know, it's like, have you ever thought about how like brands control us? But at the same time, I mean, there's this whole series in it of images of rats.
Yes.
Well, do you want to talk about that one?
So this is Adrien Brody's attempt to tackle, the immigration issue and, refugees who are often negatively described as rats. And his way of approaching it is to splash images of cartoon rats surrounded by, I guess, more of his cuttings and...
like rats with sunglasses.
Yeah, just...
with pants on.
It really is juvenile. It really is quite juvenile, and just lack of self-awareness. And
the text next to it is very long and involved, and talks about the use of the metaphor of the rat in anti-Semitic tropes during the Nazi period, and connects it to his recent movie, The Brutalist, and talks about how, he's reclaiming the image of a rat as a positive image to counter that, and how, the Nazis hated Mickey Mouse and called him a filthy rat. But then elsewhere in the show, he's got like Mickey Mouse, I don't know, with a machine gun, or Mickey Mouse's clothes are covered with like the logo for like Google and Starbucks. The metaphors here are so mixed and like lumbering that it really has to be seen to be believed.
It's almost like AI slop or something. It's almost like you put American culture into an algorithm and it just churned something back out. Because none of the things that are in it, from what you're describing, those could be incorporated into artworks very well, like there's lots of like that generation, like Gen X artists. Like I was thinking about, Michel Majerus, who just had that major show at the ICA Miami, and I can't believe I'm bringing him up in proximity to Adrien Brody right now, but here I go, who, uses in his paintings like elements of pop culture and recycles of brands and logos and cartoons and things, but does it like with an awareness of art history and also like basic sense of composition. And then his is actually like exquisite. And I think in a way, like to me, I was just looking at these images being like, wow, like you're just a bad artist. Like your intention is maybe like honest or something, but that doesn't mean that you can paint or should. Stick with acting.
There is actually one piece that I think is so representative of everything he's trying to do, which is his gum wall, which is a canvas. It reads, "The gum wall. Chew on this, stick your gum here." So it's inviting visitors to...
And there's a bunch of gum.
There's a bunch of gum by the side. You're supposed to put the chewing gum in your mouth, take it out, and stick it on this canvas, which, besides it being gross, I think it really says a lot about Adrien Brody's art, which is, it's chewed up Warhol, it's chewed up Basquiat, it's chewed up Rauschenberg in the way he does his collages, and it's just plastered on a canvas, which is now covered. It's covered in people's spit and DNA. I mean,
the thing that people really make fun of him for, and it's funny to have this conversation when we were just talking about the articles we've run about the market for trophy art and the difficulties in the middle market, because in a previous podcast we talked about our colleague Katya's article about Warhol and talking to people about trophy Warhols, and one of the things she said is that like younger collectors don't know who Marilyn Monroe is or Elvis is, that like you can't expect pop art based around like really old pop culture to carry its value forever. And then here's Adrien Brody, who's like, they're literal images of Marilyn Monroe, just like Andy Warhol, and the text explains like, have you ever thought about like the price of beauty and celebrity? And it's unreal. I mean, you couldn't make it up, but there he is, selling artworks for $400K, this successful avatar of the middle market. Well, I think we can probably leave it there. Kate, so nice to talk to you about all this.
It was great to be here. Thanks, Ben.
And Min, always a pleasure.
thank you.
That's it for this week's episode. If you like what you've heard, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, please do take a moment to rate and review our show. It will help other listeners discover what we're doing. The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili, with contributions from Kate Brown, Ben Davis, Caroline Goldstein, and Naomi Ray. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.